There is something super interesting going on in South Carolina where failed former President Donald Trump is really struggling to find state lawmakers willing to show up at this stupid rally event he has planned for this weekend and support him on stage. Now, let me kind of remind you what's going on. Trump's running for president again in 2024. He announced relatively early. He basically hasn't left his house since the announcement in November, but now he is starting events. One such event is in South Carolina this weekend. Our correspondent Luke Beasley is going to be there. He will be interviewing people. Should be pretty interesting content that we will have for you as a result. Now, Trump doesn't seem to be struggling to get federal level lawmakers who represent South Carolina to go and stand with him at the rally. But the state lawmakers are hilariously not super thrilled about participating. There is a Rolling Stone article, "So sad, Trump's South Carolina rally getting little support from state lawmakers. Despite making numerous pleading phone calls, the former president's team is hitting a wall in the state," writes Peter Wade for Rolling Stone. The Washington Post reports that Trump's team has been making pleading phone calls to potential supporters across the state, but many are responding with less than enthusiasm because South Carolina lawmakers are not yet ready to commit to a candidate, especially when two of the state's Republicans are eyeing presidential runs themselves. That's former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and current South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. The article also mentions Lindsey Graham and Henry McMaster are expected to show up and show support. This is really, really interesting because if you look at polling in South Carolina, you find that the majority of South Carolina's residents disapprove of Trump. And to a certain degree, it seems as though the state politicians, people in the state House, state Senate, are either on the same page in their disapproval for Trump or are kind of reading the tea leaves and saying, well, I don't know that I want to get ahead of myself and to support Trump and be publicly seen and tied to Trump when many of my constituents don't seem to be big fans. We don't even know if Trump will be the nominee. We don't know what things will look like come next year. And so you end up with this situation where only 5 of the state's Republican senators and representatives are publicly supporting Trump. Some, like Jeff Duncan, are pushing back against his policies and have been critical of Trump's trade policy, for example, or have said Trump hasn't been doing the right things to make the immigration system more fair or whatever the case may be. And then some state reps from South Carolina have gone even further than simply not voicing support. You've got, for example, like Nancy Mace, who is trying to pass legislation that undermines some of Trump's policy ideas. Like she wants to protect so-called dreamers from deportation, whereas Trump was open to deporting dreamers. So this is potentially going to be a problem for Trump as this campaign tries to get going. There have been advisors to Trump just blanketing South Carolina, trying to find people to come and support him. And the important thing to remember, and we learned this from the Democratic primary, just because a candidate can have a rally with a few thousand people, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are well-liked statewide. And, you know, one of the things we experienced during the Democratic primary was that if you based your estimates of support for Bernie Sanders based on Twitter and Reddit, and I was one of his supporters, you had a much inflated sense of Bernie's support within the Democratic Party. And then when voting actually started taking place, you got a very different sense, and we know ultimately how that went down. That all being said, the polls, as we reviewed yesterday, are still looking pretty good for Trump in the Republican primary. There was a period there in early December where Ron DeSantis was really doing quite well in the polling, but it does appear, at least right now, that Donald Trump has a commanding lead in just about every Republican primary poll of substance. That being said, nobody else has announced. Trump is being put up in polls against people who aren't even officially running yet. And that could mean something quite different once we get more announcements. So we're going to follow it. I will not be covering the rally this weekend. I'm actually going to be away. But Luke Beasley is going to be there, and then we'll have clips for when I am back. One of our sponsors today is Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zippix brings you a convenient alternative to smoking and vaping End the vape clouds, the ashtrays, the thing in your lip that people can see. I've seen that around. This is an easier and less messy way to curb the cravings, and you can use Zippix just about anywhere. Zippix is available in 6 flavors with 2 or 3 milligram strength. The nicotine and the flavor are long lasting, and Zippix has helped countless people kick the bad habits, and they are bad habits. Zippix toothpicks are FDA registered. Their customer service is second to none. It is one of the most cost-effective alternatives. Also, check out their B12 and caffeine toothpicks. See for yourself why so many people have switched to Zippix toothpicks. You can only get Zippix online. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com and get 10% off with the code PACMAN. The link is down below.